Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which looks at any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Hosted by Alli Naithani. Here's Alli.
Welcome to the show, and I'll start off by welcoming my co-hosts. They are Junita Kathy. Hi, Junita.
Hello.
And Nadia Giordana. Hi, Nadia.
Hi, nice to be here today.
Nice to be back together. We're doing a show, and how have you both been?
It's been good. Love summer.
Yes.
Good, enjoying the summer.
Enjoying every moment of this beautiful heat and the walks around the lake and
Long
just,
days.
Yes, yes, and the sunshine. Best
And the
of all.
supermoon.
That's right. Oh, the supermoon. Good point. Well, I want to introduce our first guest. Her name is Wendy Brown-Baez. She is a writer, a performance poet, a teacher, and an installation artist. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Wendy. Wendy, you and I have met before, but I haven't talked to you in a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a performance poet?
Okay. So I was writing poetry as a teenager, you know, all those kind of anguished teenage love poems and things like that. But in the year 2000, I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I met a woman who invited me to her women's poetry group. So there was a group of 5 of us, and we were all very dramatic and theatrical. And we decided that we wanted to do a reading that was a little different than the normal someone stand up and read for 10 minutes of their own poetry. That we would do it by topics, and we called them rounds. So we'd have a topic, and each one of us would do a poem that would match that topic. And we rehearsed it all ahead of time. We had costumes. We did a ritual on stage. And it was a very amazing experience for us and for our audience. But I had one poem that I wanted to share, and it was, this first reading we did was the time of Dia de los Muertos, and my partner had passed away. And I had just found, you know, a poem just came to me the day before he died, and I wanted to share that poem. But it was so emotional that I couldn't just read it on a piece of paper. I felt like I needed the audience to just hold me in their attention. And so I decided to memorize it. And the reaction of feeling the audience with me was so incredible because they did. They just really embraced me. And I decided I was just going to memorize all of my poems from then on. So that was the start.
So the process of writing poetry as opposed to writing short stories, talk a little about that. Is it more of a healing process? Is it more creative outlet? Tell us a little about the process of writing poetry.
Well, I tend to brood a lot. There's things that come up that I don't understand, or I'm trying to access my own emotional response. And so poetry is a really great way to be able to do that. And so I brood and I think, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have to start writing some words on paper to express what this is I'm thinking about. And I've been in groups where we have prompts that, you know, kind of jumpstart the writing process, but I love to hear poetry or read poetry to jumpstart my own creative process. There's something about the flow of language and entering into that intuitive part of your mind.
One thing you said I just found so fascinating, because I've never thought about it this way, is that you getting and needing, almost needing that energy from the audience, that was comforting for you. So as a performance artist, getting that back.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I think that's pretty neat.
And you have a direct response.
Yeah.
So you kind of know if it's working, you know, if your poem is working or not.
Okay.
Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you make a mistake. But I've also gone into the audience and, you know, shook hands with people. I've had people in the audience participate in the poem where I've given them lines to recite, and they stand up during certain parts and read their lines. And I love that. I love that sense of interconnectedness that happens.
Well, we have an opportunity to see you performing a poem. So let's just take a pause and watch Wendy perform.
Okay. This poem is a collection of various women's voices, and it's called Last Wish. I want to dance in a nightclub in Paris. I want to sing in a cabaret, my hair falling across my face, a sultry voice and red lips. I want to disappear in a gypsy caravan with a man whispering sweet nothings, leave behind a chain of broken hearts. I want to be as smart as Sherlock Holmes, and a scholar of ancient texts. My glasses tap, tap, tapping as I ponder ancient languages and sudden epiphanies. I want to be twirled by a Nureyev. I want to sit zazen until the mountain dissolves into blossom. I want to float down the river on a riverboat with a royal flush in my hands. I want red shoes. I want to tap my way through the tulips. I want joy to float me over the disappointments like a horse jumping its hurdles, knowing he will land on his feet. I want to embrace the world like Mama Storyteller with thousands of children in her lap. I want to be a rainbow, flaunting my colors across a darkened sky, wishing I'm gone, bequeathing pots of gold. I want to be as brave and salty as the sea, ready for the bottle to land on the sand, ready for the cork to be popped. I want to be the one to find the message. I want to dance the dance of the seven veils, remove each one until all that is left is a shadow, and all you hear is a song. I want rose petals scattered on the sheets and candles floating down a stream and sunsets flowing from my arms. I want to be kisses that are flung to the stars. I want to not care if I'm a rose or a weed.
Wendy, that was fantastic. It was really good to see you perform again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciated the, the movements, and even with the scarf, that imagery, it just it brought me into it. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of kind of like spoken word.
Right.
You know, there's
Yeah.
just a flow, a rhythmic flow to the way that you recited the poem. That was fabulous. It does make it more moving and more of a connection.
I see that, yeah. Yeah. Memorizing the poems, though, that amazes me. I write poetry from time to time, not a lot of it, and not as long as yours, but I could never memorize even most of my shorter poems. Is there a trick to that, or is that just a skill that you have?
Well, not every poem lends itself to being a performance poem. There's certain ones that have a rhythm, and as a child I took dance lessons, so I think that's still in my body.
Yeah.
So I practice, the same movements over and over again. I practice in front of a mirror. I'm also in public transportation, so I do practice while I'm waiting at the bus stop. I go, just go through the lines over and over again, and there's, eventually body remembers. It kind of remembers the emotions,
Yeah.
and so it remembers the words.
Okay.
So you're a performance poet, and then you also mentioned that you're an installation artist.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. I've done several different installations. One was with Face to Face Academy, where we created a structure, and they had a CD of their writings that they had recorded, and people could sit inside and listen to their work. And right now I've received an arts and culture grant from St. Louis Park to do an event called Treasure Hunt, and a group of women, it ended up being women at the end, wrote together, and then we made our writings into works of art, mixed media art, using found objects. So shadow boxes and collage work, things like that. And it's hung all around St. Louis Park. And then we'll have a final reading on August 8th at Wolf Creek Pavilion. And these are all women who are writers, not artists, so it was kind of a stretch, but it was really interesting for them to feel that they got more out of their own poem by creating art out of it.
And is the art consisting of the actual text
Yep.
of the poem?
Yep.
Just in different shapes and textures?
Some of it was just printed out, some of it's been handwritten out. I have one piece I myself did that's on a table runner, and I just pinned with straight pins the text and photographs. So it's anybody could do it, really. That was kind of my point.
However they interpreted it.
Yeah, anyone can take their written work and make art out of it.
Yeah.
It's
And
easy.
so when it's hung throughout the city, is there sort of a display where you can go and see this?
Yep.
Or is it just sort of in random locations throughout St. Louis
It's
Park?
in 10 different locations, so City Hall, the library, and businesses. So and it's treasure hunt, so you have to go and hunt for it.
That's the fun part, yeah.
Right.
So what's
Yeah.
you talked about the impact for the writers, but why what's with the community? And that might be a kind of a very simple question, but I want to hear why is this important for the community?
Well, part of my passion is to bring poetry into places where you don't expect poetry to be.
Okay.
So I wanted the art to attract people as they were doing their normal everyday shopping. So when you go to the Drooling Moose to buy chocolate, you would see art, and it would draw you in to read the poem. So it's kind of like finding poetry in unexpected places, so that it would just, bring poetry into people that don't ordinarily read poetry.
When you say that, and I'm thinking, as you're saying, how it impacts the community, I'm imagining seeing one of these pieces of art, and I can't imagine reading poetry and not smiling. So it has to do something to our mood. Like if I'm reading a poem, I think naturally a smile would come on my face, regardless of the topic of it, or there's just some sort of feeling. I mean, do you think that's true for how people are experiencing it, or is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a bridge between us. So that's an interaction with the audience that's happening while I'm not there. Just the poem is there, but yeah, there's an interaction happening where people are moved and affected and impacted.
And you talked about getting grants. What's entailed with doing that, and how do you bring that about so that you have? Is it funding for your projects and other things?
Well, I've gotten a couple McKnight grants that were to do the art installation with Face to Face, but I also got a grant through the Minnesota State Arts Board, and that was to bring writing workshops into a series of nonprofits. And so I was able to sneak the poetry in because it was a writing workshop that they were signing up for. And then I used poetry as jumpstart, so a way to, again, access your intuition. So we would read the poems together. We'd take turns reading it. And then I would suggest something to write, a writing prompt, to put pen to the paper and keep it moving.
I find it interesting Wendy used the word sneak the poetry in.
Yeah.
Is that because so people just don't know what to think about poetry, or is it?
I think people are, a lot of people are afraid of poetry.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people have said, I don't really like poetry, or I don't read poetry. And we have this incredible amount of contemporary poetry that's wonderful and accessible. But people remember, what they learned in school, kind of the romantic poets and, the difficult poems that they felt they couldn't understand. And I always say, you don't have to understand it to have an emotional reaction to it.
Yeah, there's something about the words, even when you don't understand the full meaning of the poem, there's something, it triggers something in the person. I think that's a mark of a good poet.
And I think adding the performance piece to poetry is another layer that allows the reader or the audience to enjoy the poetry or to experience it. It's one thing to read it, but to be able to watch someone like you actually performing it with all the movements and the voice inflections, and I think it just allows someone who wouldn't think about it the opportunity to experience it and maybe enjoy it or consider learning more about it.
Right. And sometimes you can't hear every single word that somebody is saying when they're reciting a poem, but if you're doing the movements and the costuming, you're getting what it's about on a different level.
Yeah, you're getting the feel and the mood and the emotions all in one. Yeah,
plus it's fun.
Yes.
Oh, it seems like it is. The way you bring it to life. It's just, And of course you wrote 2 books. Do you want to tell us the title?
Yeah, so
Quick.
Ceremonies of the Spirit was the first book that I published, and it's a series of love poems.
Okay.
I have that one.
Yes, and it's not just romantic love, it's all kinds of love, spiritual
great.
love and love for family and places. And then Transparencies of Light is really, I try to write from the perspective of different women who may not have a voice, especially women in other cultures that don't have a voice. I've spent time in the Middle East, and I've spent time in Mexico. So I have some of the voices of women that are experiencing loss or war in places where there's war, and I'm trying to capture their voice and tell their story.
Beautiful work. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Nice to
me.
meet you. Yeah.
Yes, I really enjoyed watching you perform the poem.
Yes.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
This has been great. It's fun to talk about poetry once in a while.
Absolutely. All right. Well, stay with us. Up next, we're going to talk about human rights in Minnesota and also around the world.